for those of you who work in the city, is there anything that you would love for those in the burbs to know that they don't realize about what you do? Any misconceptions, anything like that? Go ahead and have at it.
Church growth in the city is probably 5 times less than church growth in the suburbs. How's that one?
In other words, you're saying that's a misconception.
Yeah, I mean, in the city, I think it's just a much like I think probably most of the guys on this call, if they were planting a church in the suburbs, they'd be at 250 way before they'd be at 250 in the city. That's my experience.
Very good.
Not just in my own work, but I mean in other guys that come into the city to do a work. So it's a completely different, you know, concept for people to think where after X amount of time where you should be numbers wise.
Yeah, Daniel,
And
why do you think that is? Why do you think it's slower?
Well, I think uh, a lot of the reasons that people are in the city, whether it's number one, like where we were in Detroit or where we are in Detroit, it's like young professionals moving into the city because they think it'll be cool, or people living in Section 8 housing and on government assistance. Both of those, the people moving into the city, the young professional, faith and religion is one of the last things on their mind. The reason they're there is a whole bunch of other reasons. And then the people, the poor people that are in the city, it's one of the last things on their mind because they're just trying to figure out where they're going to sleep tonight and what they're going to eat. So you got two people groups really that don't lend themselves much to church growth.
Dan, how does that shape how you manage your collegial model?
Have breakfast with a homeless person and dinner with a billionaire. I
Mhm.
mean, it's really, Ray, you just have to be able to meet and speak with every spectrum of people group, and then you just go where God leads you and where there's an open door, whether it's with the poor or whether it's with somebody that's going to help you fund the thing, you just go there.
Good stuff. Jeff, you were getting ready to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about sort of at least potentially the misconception that, and this was maybe coming back from the 80s when people would say, "Oh, well, this city's it's a dark place," and I think the city's a glorious place, and I think most of us who minister in urban areas think it's a glorious place. Um, that yeah, you actually see harsher things than probably you see elsewhere because they aren't hidden here. But there's so many glories that are brought out in the city as well. So I think most of us, there's definitely difficulties. There's inconveniences of ministering in the city, but it's a glorious place to minister, and that's like the one misconception I would perhaps like address.
Mhm. Good word.
And I think, if I could just interject, there is a depth to the relationship in the city that my wife and I, as suburbanites, have never experienced before. Just people saying, be sure to call me when you get home so I know you made it safe
Mhm.
is not an occasional or once in a while thing. It's every time
Mhm.
because people deeply care about each other. It was probably 3 or 4 years ago when my wife turned to me and said, "Thank you so much for moving me into the inner city."
Mhm.
And I was shocked.
Mhm.
And I picked my mouth up off the floor and said, "Why would you say that?" And she said, "Because I have never had such deep relationships before in my life."
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
go hand in hand with that and say part of that is that privacy is not a value in the city as much as it is
that's
other
right.
places. You have shared parks, shared laundromats, shared sidewalks, shared public spaces that shared life is part of life in the city that it's forced, you can't escape it. And that's again kind of what Dan's saying. That's a wonderful thing that actually adds to the richness of
And I
urban
think
life.
I think there's a humility too that nobody, I don't have to do a whole lot of work to convince somebody that they're a sinner. Everybody is a sinner in the city. And so we start from our common identity as sinners, um, living our lives before the face of God. And so that humility as a starting point leads very easily into grace for each other, into understanding our need for each other. And I think that's another part of the tightness
I
that
think
I
that's
see.
kind of what Schaefer was lamenting, 50 years ago, this thing on personal peace and affluence and how we don't know our neighbors in the burbs. And you guys are just speaking into the beauty of
Right.
what was left behind.
I
Yeah,
think
I
would
can say to somebody on the street, "Can I pray for you?" And that person will say yes immediately.
Right.
I do that at the mall in the suburbs, and they're offended.
I think that's actually speaks to when we're talking about city, we're talking about a big definition here
Mhm.
Yeah.
because I would say in my context, people probably think they're more righteous than they are sinners. And I think if I stopped and said, "Can I pray for you?" they would run away fast. Um, and so, demographically, cities have variance themselves depending on where you are. Um, just speaking personally, um, I, Jeff uh, reminded me of something in my first conversation I ever had with Tim Keller. We came up to visit, my wife and I, and he said, I guess because he had seen enough people like burn out or run away, he just said, the city will drain you, so it has to energize you. And just what Jeff was saying, the city energizes uh, me, but also the conditions require a lot of effort to be a calm presence. I'd say anxiety feels higher in cities because of all the reasons we said. And so I find it takes among our people a lot of effort just to try not to be anxious.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Fascinating. But Glenn, you have a very special outlet too, right?
oh, I'm
Your
sorry.
music.
Oh, yeah. No, I do. That becomes that's a good way to interact with the city in ways that yeah, it's another way for me to
Mhm.
see the city.
Neat.
Maybe this is
Um,
unique to Detroit, but uh, one of the things I found, and this goes to Dan's point, that we have found the same warm-heartedness in Detroit, but it's because there just almost is literally nobody that we meet that's from downtown Detroit.
Hmm.
They either are stuck there because that's where they could get affordable housing, or they moved away from their families to that spot. They were not raised there.
Hmm.
So in a sense, it feels like, it's Jerusalem back in the day the church was founded. All these people are thrown in there,
Hmm.
and there's a better chance that they can become family.
Hmm.
And also to Dan's point, it's uh, or maybe it was, no, I think it was Dan. We could go up to anybody on the street and say, "Can I pray for you?" And they'd say, "Please." Uh, so just, yeah, a different context, Glenn. Yeah, for sure.
Eric, you were getting ready to say something.
yeah, and yeah, I think a couple things we're touching on that are important is what does city mean anymore? So I think depending on where you are, things are changing rapidly. So those words and what does urban mean? What does inner city mean? What does the city at large mean? I think those are just certain things. I don't know if those are misconceptions, but I think they all sort of conjure up something in our mind and they might be different. And so I find sometimes just even the definitions of words, we're not even talking about the same thing. And then you got places like, I mean, I'm in the South. I think I'm the only one, right? So, but you got a place like Atlanta where, I mean, what was the inner city is now, $1 million homes. And, New York's done the same thing in all the places in certain ways. But but that really does change things. It really there's a different reality of where people are and those types of things. So that's a thing. Second thing I'd say, I don't know if it's a misconception, but it's certainly something to understand is I remember when we stopped having our worship service, and that's the whole story, but I remember people coming to me and saying, well, gosh, what are you going to do now? And I said the very same thing I've been doing for the past however long, because the worship service is a moment in our week, but when you're in the city, ministry never stops. In a certain, maybe a different type of way, where I think in the suburbs or whatever, you're sort of the week is this time of preparation, it seems like, for a thing that happens, on Sunday and all the things that are happening maybe programmatically. I'm not saying ministry's not happening in those other places, but I think you guys understand what I'm saying. There's like a nonstop nature to things. And so I think that's a little bit of a misconception, is that the front lines nature of ministry kind of is like always there. And that there's a lot of people that will never come through the doors of our church that would maybe even call you pastor or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but they've never been on a Sunday. And what do you do with that? And your kind of again definitions of how do you relate to everyone, right? So that's one thing. And then the third thing I'd say is I this is the big one for me is I long for uh, people to understand that we're also pushing and really trying to make disciples, just like people in the suburbs are. But a lot of times, what I feel like people are looking to us is, hey, let me give you a physical thing, a tangible thing. Don't you just need this or that? Which, of course, is true, but like in certain ways. But we're on this long road of development and discipleship, so it's sort of the when helping hurts stuff and relief versus really developing. And that's I feel like a big misconception is people looking and saying, well, don't you just need X, Y, or Z? And it's like, well, we're on this like 30-year, train of really trying to slowly disciple people, which is really the same thing you're doing. It's actually a common ground place, I think, for the church, but it seems to be this thing where it's like, oh, you're doing something different over there. And Carl Ellis has been super helpful for me on this, but Jesus didn't go say make converts. He said go make disciples, and the same is true in the inner city. But there's certain things that make that maybe a little tougher, um, but we're really trying to do the same thing, and that's a big deal for us.
Good word. Brad, I'm wondering how you're hearing all this. You and I are probably the closest to the burbs. By the way, are you sitting in that cool room we sat in back of your house? Oh man, I wish I was there with you. It's a great room. How are
Yeah,
you
yeah.
hearing all this?
I really wish you hadn't said that because that makes it a lot harder for me to say that I feel personally offended by everything that's been said so far as a suburban pastor. No, I'm kidding. There are perks in the suburbs, but yeah, this is interesting. I'm not sure how I got to be the only kind of suburban guy here, but I
I
mean,
deal with a little rejection here and there.
that's that's fair. Yeah, no, this is super interesting. I have a strange maybe a mixed perspective in this because before we moved to Colorado, I was part of a church plant in downtown South City of St. Louis for 6 years and part of it there for the very beginning. And and so there's a whole lot of ways that like, man, the things that you guys are talking about, like, yep, absolutely, 100%. And I think one of the things that I didn't have any misconceptions actually until we started this conversations. But now I actually have a couple, and this is really good and helpful actually because, to the point of, you know, like I think Jeff, you said something about like, there's this kind of misconception that the city is a dark place. I remember it was a friend of mine who was in seminary, who he's done city ministry and suburban ministry. And I remember him saying, he's like, hey, Brad, I figured out why I prefer ministry in the city. And I was like, why? I mean, I can think of some reasons. It's pretty stinking cool, among other things. And he said, it's easier. And I don't think he's actually right. I think it's just different, right? Because I think that I tell our people all the time, like, do not be fooled by the surface level beauty of this place. There is a lot of darkness. It's just and the brokenness here is just extremely hidden. It's isolated and atomized down to the individual, and it's highly medicated in ways and among people that you might not actually understand or notice. But it's just as broken. It's just as broken. The difference is it's actually harder to draw out because people are not used to seeing it. And so they don't know how to address it or bring it up. And if you were the one carrying that brokenness, it's a heck of a lot harder to be vulnerable and open with someone because you don't ever see an example of how that happens. And so that creates a profound loneliness in the suburbs that is equal and opposite to the kind of, at least in our place, the more economic affluence and wealth. The other thing that's really interesting, I think, uh, especially in my suburb anyway, the ministry here has changed dramatically pre versus post pandemic. Axios had an article that named Boulder. I think this was in 2023. So it named Boulder as having the highest per capita number of remote virtual workers of any city in the country, and I think it was like 38 or 40%,
Yep.
something right in there, and that's wild. And it includes people who are working half time and serving tables because they're going to grad school at CU. So it's probably even higher percentage. And what that does is it actually kind of flattens culture across the board because the internet becomes the primary culture shaping place for people more than a geographic or physical place. And that just further just kind of isolates people because you're not interacting. And we know because of the pandemic how much that actually, digital interaction is not the same as in-person interaction. And so it's just deepening that kind of loneliness and sense of isolation. And so I think, I mean, we could talk about a whole lot of things, but I don't want to filibuster here too much. But yeah, I think the ways that suburban ministry requires significant intentionality and proactivity. People won't just kind of show up on Sunday morning. They have to burn through whatever wealth is helping them bowl with bumpers in life first. And that is often significant. And so it takes a lot. It takes a lot for people to admit that they actually need a savior, never mind a church, even more than a church. Yeah.
Brad, I think that's part of
Go
the
ahead.
reason why I love inner city ministry because I don't have to deal with that. I mean, it is
Yeah.
like Daniel said, inner city ministry is constant. It doesn't stop. It's always, you're always on to the next thing, and it can be very difficult. But the transparency of people, the that part of it, the relationship piece, I think is very helpful. And we've had the same thing with people wanting to stream instead. That's not maybe so unique, mostly because they don't have a ride. But what I've tried to emphasize for my congregation is that God has gifted them in a particular way to build up the church. And when they're not there, that doesn't happen. And so I try to emphasize the importance of being there to give to the church your gift rather than being there to receive. And I think that provided for the congregation a certain level of affirmation that has been very helpful for people who otherwise are not affirmed at all,
Mm.
who oftentimes are dismissed and dehumanized. And so the fact that God has gifted a person to build up the church and the fact that we are very deliberate in making sure everyone's voice is heard in the service, that I think is another piece that has, even if people aren't standing up during our sharing time, they know sharing time happens. And that is an affirmation of the community that transfers to individuals as well. And so,
That's
yeah,
fascinating because I just got done telling our people like one of the most powerful and helpful things you can do is ask for help here.
yeah,
Because if nobody's doing it, nobody knows that there is a need for their giftedness for what they have to offer and contribute either relationally or otherwise. But also, nobody knows how to do it because there's nobody leading by example and saying, like, the gospel is significant enough for me that I can admit that I need help and also allow somebody to help me because that's a vulnerable thing. Yeah.
Something I'd throw in there, Brad, is that, and you talked about Dan, you talked about the haves and the have-nots in Detroit. You could have breakfast with a homeless and dinner with a billionaire. And I'd like to get his name, by the way, just thinking out of the box here.
You got
But
to get in line behind me.
yeah, there you go. But I think another difference is because I'm from Miami, which is a city of suburbs, really. And I think of where we are now is that what you find when you peel behind the backdrop is that most people want to appear that they belong here, including financially, and many of them are hanging on by a thread. You don't see the haves and the have-nots as readily, but there are haves and
Yeah.
have-nots. And there's some that if they lost that 5 hours a week, they would be in trouble, whether they're in debt up their eyeballs or whatever it might be. So there really are different dynamics between the two for sure.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if any of you have any stories of collaboration where you saw burbs and city come together, and to Eric's point, however you would define where you are, and you figured out a way to work well together towards your end and even towards those who were helping you from the outside.
Well, I can say just I probably didn't make this clear enough, but the church planting initiative that I'm leading, the Detroit project, most of the works are in the suburbs. So when we get together every week, we pray together, we're deeply vested in each other's ministries. And so there's a constant collaboration of inner city and suburb works in our network. Um, the thing that's common in this model that I've tried to develop and write about and kind of bring to bear is that, and I think this is true just today in the post-Christian kind of culture we're in, is we're trying to put pastors in areas to plant churches, get churches going, where they become known as that community or that town or that city's pastor. And I think this goes to Eric's point. We're finding people who consider our church planter their pastor 2 years in, and they've never stepped a foot in his church yet. They would say, he's my pastor. And I'm telling you, the reason I bring that up is because we're finding that's true both in suburbs and city. People want to get to know a man of God that they could, over time, begin to trust. And then, by the way, we've also seen many people who have started coming to church a year, year and a half, 2 years after meeting the pastor.
Yeah,
So,
Dan, I would say that really is true for the burbs as well. And there is something deeply gratifying about that in there, that someone that you see, whether it's at a diner or whatever, they really see you in that light. And there will be a day
that's
where
right.
even if they don't step into your doors, where they say, "Can you help?" And that's a gift. It's a
Yeah, I
privilege.
mean, just real quick, one other thing, you guys will love this. Gal that one of our church planters has been working with, she owns a restaurant bar and has a speakeasy underneath her bar. She wants nothing to do with what his doctrine is. But when he started promoting this thing called questioning Christianity, which is like we're calling a Seekeasy, if you will, she said, the atheist said, you know what, why don't you do it in my speakeasy?
That's beautiful.
You can have it for free. And
Wow.
and so she considers him her pastor, and I
Yeah.
believe there will be a day where she shows up at one of the questioning Christianity events.
Good stuff. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to McLean Press. We were planted by Redeemer New York and McLean, but McLean, you know, all these people that were commuting from the city out to them, and they persevered for a couple years just to help us get this thing started.
Mm.
And recently we've begun to have conversations about, is there more, could we do discipleship better and not reinvent the wheel? We kind of networked across some of these churches. They have resources that we don't. And that sort of gets to your second question. I don't mean to pull us too much ahead, Mike, but
Oh, no worries.
yeah, you know, there are times where I see friends that have planted in the suburbs. You know, their resources have enabled them to do discipleship in areas where I feel like we do it weekly, week, WEAK,
Mhm.
you know, and I know there's things that we offer to them too, but I look around at some of these churches and go, oh, they're really doing that part of discipleship better than we have done. And I don't know how much of that is contextual, but some of it is. Some of it is.
Great word.
I'm actually curious what you guys think about this in the sense of I feel like maybe a much more significant kind of difference now is whether your context is post-Christian versus a more churched context. Because a lot of what you guys are saying, you know, from in larger cities, I'm like, yes and amen. That actually has a whole lot of overlap with my experience here in Boulder County, where, you know, there's about 10 churches within 20 minutes of where we worship, but there's 150,000 people who live there, and there's like 10 actual churches. And I know that that's like that would be a dream for many in a highly dense urban environment. But some of the resource challenges you guys are talking about, like I've actually looked to a lot of you know, the Redeemer New York guys on like how do we handle being kicked out of the schools and like not being able to worship in a public school. Like that was we were like 6 weeks away from being homeless as a church post pandemic, and we went almost 18 months between weekly worship because of the policies and also available facilities here. And so like I'm just wondering if if that is maybe a more significant difference than the kind of the density and geographic fabric of a place.
Anybody on that?
I mean, the inner city where I am is not post-Christian. Everybody believes in something, you know, and most people believe that Jesus is Lord. They just don't live that way, you know. So, I mean, I can run into a guy who's still high and drunk on the street who can quote to me all of Isaiah. You know, it's just amazing, you know, content in people's heads because they were catechized in the black church years and years ago and just strayed. So a lot of it is bringing people back to faith. Where I am, it's not a whole lot of bringing people into the faith for the first time. In fact, a lot of times it's, yeah, I have a church, you know, because the first question we ask is, do you go to church somewhere? And they say, yeah, I have a church. Who's the pastor there? Is the next question because they usually don't know.
They can't tell you.
It's a family church. And, you know, they haven't been to church in 10, 15 years, you know, so it's bringing people back when they already believe, mostly for me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you all think that the denomination, and this isn't to overglorify or bash the PCA, but we are in a denomination, and so many times generalities can rule how we see things. For instance, years ago with church planting, there was, and you may have experienced this, Jeff. Of course, you came out of Redeemer, but the rule of thumb was you got support for 5 years and you were cut off. And a lot of times that was really detrimental to the development of the church, and it made the church planter be more about the money than establishing a presence in the community. So some adjustments had to be made in thinking. Do you think that the denomination appreciates the differences between beyond the popularity of starting something in the city between the burbs and the city or the urban core, whatever it might be? How has the denomination benefited you, and where could it improve?
I think though one thing I would say there is that many of the our church in Harlem, the two Dans and Eric are doing are sort of mission outposts in some ways, and therefore churches being committed to them as unique mission outposts is critical. Redeemer was wonderful about that, as were a number of churches in our area. They were glad to support the work in Harlem for years, and I'm profoundly grateful for that. I think they understood that. I at least had that privilege of them understanding that, because there are different churches being planted in, Redeemer could not be any more different from the church I did in Harlem. And they, require, yeah, different understandings of how they're going to thrive in over the years.
So it helped for Redeemer and for Tim to respect the reality of those differences that were needed too.
Yeah, hugely. And on a whole bunch of different fronts, but yeah, for sure.
Very good. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I just part of this model that I've developed, we're encouraging church planters, and this reason I call it missionary model or city campus model. We're encouraging church planters to raise money almost in perpetuity.
Hmm.
The whole 3 to 5 years of funding. I mean, you go back to Al Barth. Al Barth was adamant that it's no more than 3 years. And he's changing his tune there. Al's saying, no, it's a different game now. But Ted Powers will say today 7 to 10 years.
Mhm.
I'm just saying, for the time being, this is why I love crew guys who are coming in and becoming church planters, because they're used to raising money in perpetuity. And I think that's what needs to happen to give you the capacity to do the ministry you really want to do. And I think church planters especially do default to reshuffling sheep because they're running out of money.
Hmm.
Right. I mean, that's the biggest challenge. One of the biggest challenges that I have is I think our accounts are down to about 35 grand right now.
Mhm.
So that's my margin. We spend, or our budget for Mercy Ministry is about 2,000 a month. So that becomes difficult to maintain. And that is a big part of our illustrating the gospel. So when I bring the gospel to somebody, I need to be able to demonstrate to that person my love for you is more than just spiritual, it's also physical. I don't want to be a Gnostic about salvation. Salvation is also physical sometimes. And so when Christ brings salvation, when he brings healing in a physical way, that's the illustration of the spiritual healing that we all need ultimately. And when I can't do that well, then it tends to build hard feelings and lost expectations that I can deal with that, but it makes it difficult to try to navigate how to communicate to somebody who's used to entitlements and who has received, gifts of mercy for bus pass or for heat or for whatever it happens to be, helping to finish the rent. And, when that ends, or when I can't afford to provide that, it can be difficult sometimes. So that support is important. The support from, like, I work particularized for 5 years now. I will always need to raise money, always.
Yeah, I think a helpful thing along those lines was I love that Mother Teresa line where she says, we need the poor more than the poor need us. And therefore, having to, and actually, it's not just a nice romantic, emotionally thing to say. There's once you parse that out and you can communicate that to some of the wealthier congregations around you, they can understand, oh yeah, this is actually really important for us. We're not just coming alongside and helping this poor struggling church. We're in this mission together of seeing the kingdom and the new creation witness to. And these guys are on the front lines of some of that really important kingdom new creation witness. If we, trying to help our suburban brothers and sisters understand that, which in my experience, they were more than glad to understand. There was not a reticence to that, but still there is that work that needs to be done. But yeah, I think works like the two Dans and Eric's will always need meaningful support, and Redeemer tries to do that with any number of urban ministries.
I'm curious to hear from Eric as to where about your funding, Eric. I'm assuming from what you said that you're thinking more perpetual.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, our collaboration experience was, we have a church here in Orlando called New City, and that's the church that sent us out. Started there as an intern, so I think building a relationship with a church prior to going out, so to speak, it was very beneficial for us, um, because I think they've been extremely patient, similar to Redeemer, just kind of continuing to walk this out with us, continue to support us today. And yet now our budget is, far different, than it was 12 years ago. And so the funding now is, it's one of my primary jobs. Now I'm a little bit different, I think, in this group in that I'm not, goes back to what I said earlier. The community knows me as Pastor E, but I don't have a Sunday morning thing right now. And I think one of the biggest things that was, again, personal story for me, but I trying to understand who we each are as leaders, and how we work, I think is one thing that the denomination, I don't know that they quite know how to do that part, because there tends to be like this is what it means to be a church planter type of thing. And clearly we're all different. But then sometimes we try to like be that thing, and that doesn't work very well. But one of the most helpful things for me has been learning who I am, quite honestly, as a leader. And so part of to answer your question about funding is just we've one of my main jobs now has been fundraising for the entire ministry, which has after school program, now a school, mental health counseling. We're endeavoring to have vocational training, sort of building out this environment. But what I learned is that I cannot do this alone, obviously. But if I spend more time working on the vision and fundraising, and then being able to hire people who actually do some of the work, on the ground a little better than me, it goes a lot better. But I spent a lot of my ministry in a lot of shame, feeling like I had to do both, like trying to be this fundraiser, but then also trying to do the work on the ground. And the reality is, fundraising is a full-time thing in a lot of ways. So,
Glenn, sorry, Eric.
That's really helpful to hear.
Glenn, you were getting
no, you're
ready to
good.
say something.
Yeah, I had a question for you all that are working in under-resourced areas, and maybe you'd expect that this coming from me because of where I'm located. But with the change in administration and politics, do you anticipate that the demographic of the PCA, which is more sympathetic with the changes, to be less generous or more suspicious about giving to the poor, giving to poor work? So, does that make sense, that question?
Totally.
Right. I've had people out of work because they're U.S. aid, and this idea of giving has been cut. So I'm wondering if that's going to impact some of the churches that give to you.
I think giving is so much about relationship. And
Yeah.
that's what goes back to the thing I just said earlier, which is you have to at some point realize, like, man, like I can't do this alone. And that was one of the biggest gifts God gave me was stop doing this alone. Like, it's just one of the worst things. So I think I don't want to say like absolutely not. There's no effect. That would be crazy for me to say that. But I think one of the one of the realizing for me is a lot of times I feel like I'm this bridge between two worlds in a lot of ways. So I have people who have no idea what the inner city is like to and tell me but act like they do, right? Or think they know all the answers. And then I've got the inner city and they don't know what's going on over here. And I'm kind of like doing this thing where I'm trying to like navigate those relationships. But recognizing again that I have a ministry to use Dan's the billionaire, although I haven't met one of those yet. I don't think so. I need that connect to. But there's a ministry there, and recognizing this guy isn't or woman is not just a dollar sign, but needs this to what Jeff you were saying. They need this or this interchange needs to happen, and have as much of a ministry over there. So I don't know that administration, of course, it matters in certain ways, but the relationship I have with people, I think I want to say, probably the thing that matters more and all that. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Eric, that is extremely helpful to me. I've neglected fundraising because the workload of trying to do everything is so difficult. People have been very generous with us. We received $200,000 to buy a church and parsonage, and we're mortgage free on it. So what a blessing that is. And then another church in Madison gave us $90,000, which I should pay back, but they said, look, if you can't, then don't. To put on new siding and a new roof that we needed. So the people have been very generous. My favorite word, one of my favorite words in Scripture, is the word synergoi, and it's translated fellow worker, co-worker, that Paul uses directly in connection with giving. When somebody gives to Friend of Sinners Church, they're in the field with us.
Mm.
They're a fellow worker with us.
Mm.
And sometimes I think folks in the suburbs are thinking, what can I do? I need to do something. I need to be there. But people are with us when they have given. They're a fellow worker. They're in the field with us. And I think a light went on, Eric, when you were talking about that for me, because I'm 64. I'm going to be transitioning out. Somebody else is going to be coming in, and I need to make sure somehow, the idea of doing fundraising full time and giving the pastoral and mercy work to others that I raise money to support. I think that's something maybe that's so obvious I should just slap myself on the back of the head for not thinking it through. But that is a transformative thought that I haven't had before.
Dan, thank you. And thank you for translating that word. It's the only word in the Greek Testament I hadn't memorized, and I appreciate that.